Welcome to Toasty Gaming, where today we are going to take a look at how Ubisoft might deliver an Assassin's Creed story that is even more disrespectful to Japanese history and culture than we already thought, while also deeply disrespecting virtually all cultures of Sub-Saharan Africa with their depiction of Yasuke. We already know the entire drama surrounding the character of Yasuke, and Ubisoft's desperate attempts to somehow argue that him being a samurai is historically accurate, and the subsequent outrage, particularly from the Japanese community. The Ubisoft chills have recently suffered a major setback, as Thomas Lockley, a most likely former associate professor at Nihon University and the historian on whose pop science book Ubisoft's entire depiction of Yasuke is based, seems to have used incorrectly translated sources for many of his outrageous claims. Unsurprising if a British person is trying to work with Japanese sources, but still quite embarrassing. You see, in his book on Yasuke, he used a letter as source which apparently mentioned a successor of Yasuke and therefore indirectly proved Yasuke's existence. A successor, you might ask? Oh yes, Mr. Lockley, as a British person, seems to still feel quite guilty over slavery, so he just went ahead and claimed that most Japanese daimyos happily used Africans for their purposes without any real sources or evidence. Probably in a desperate attempt to ease his conscience, because shared guilt is half guilt or something like that. Or, more likely, he wanted to use these claims to further his career back home, as it is an open secret that such outrageous claims just might land you a job in the history department of a fancy university in the days of attention-whoring academia. Surprisingly enough, the Japanese took quite a bit of offense after being indirectly accused of slavery. But before we get too sidetracked, let's return to the letter Lockley used as a source. The letter, which is a part of the Kurima family documents stored at the prefectural archives of Gunma Prefecture, mentions a kuroho. Lockley somehow thought that this word meant black warrior, which makes me doubt that he can even speak the Japanese language. In a public response, the archive has pointed out that translating kuroho as black person doesn't make any sense in the context of the letter, while also pointing out that the word seems to be often used in classical Japanese literature, but with another meaning. In the Tale of Genji, for example, kuroho is translated as needed incense. I leave a link to the archive's answer in the description. It is under question 12, but do keep in mind that the website is in Japanese. I felt like I should add this bit of news before we move on to my main points, because it is important to keep in mind what kind of quote-unquote experts Ubisoft uses for their quote-unquote historically accurate game. This entire situation is also a reminder that just because someone has a PhD or is a professor somewhere, that doesn't mean that their opinion is automatically worth more. I can tell you, even from what little experience I have with the academic day-to-day so far, that you would be surprised by how many wildly unqualified people slip through the net on all levels of university education and research. This deterioration of standard in Western academia isn't even that much of a secret anymore. Therefore, it is always prudent to do a quick background check on any scientist or professor who is quoted in an internet argument. But enough about the embarrassingly pathetic state of Ubisoft's research. Let's talk about how AC Shadows will disrespect Japanese history even more than anyone expected, while taking a massive dump on all African cultures in the process. My greatest problem with Yasuke isn't even that Ubisoft made him a samurai without any evidence, although I understand why the Japanese people are so outraged by that. Nonetheless, the greatest problem I have with Yasuke isn't that he is an African samurai, it's that he is African American in a time period and place where African Americans shouldn't even exist. I draw this conclusion from Ubisoft not providing us with any information on Yasuke's ethnicity apart from his skin color and continent of origin. If he was actually an African from the period, it would make a major difference whether he's from the late Muslim Songhai Empire on the west coast of the African continent or from the Christian Empire of Ethiopia, whose emperors literally trace their lineage back to the biblical King Solomon on the east coast of the African continent. Africa is the most diverse continent in the world, with the estimated number of languages spoken across the continent ranging from 1,000 to 3,000 languages, representing thousands of ethnicities and cultures. Honestly, it is extremely racist if one actually believes that every African is just defined by being from the same continental landmass and having black skin. This is by no means reflective of the extreme diversity of this continent. Yet the only information Ubisoft can provide on Yasuke is that he's black and wears a dreadlock-like hairstyle. The hairstyle is important, by the way, because before the Europeans colonized large parts of Africa and enforced their beauty ideals, hairstyling was a literal art in most African cultures. If Ubisoft did some basic research, they would have known that. Based on how a person's hair is made, as well as the amount of ornamentation and other factors, you can find out a whole host of information about that person. Hair often stood for one's age, marital status, ethnicity, religion, wealth, societal status, and also societal role. That's the next point on why Yasuke doesn't feel like an African from the era. In those sub-Saharan cultures on the African west coast, from where the Portuguese would have most likely stolen Yasuke, dreadlocks in Yasuke style weren't worn. Let's take time for a quick overview of the most well-known cultures with dreadlocks on the African west coast. Among the Sera, Dogon, Yoruba, Ashanti and Akan, dreadlocks are virtually exclusively worn by individuals associated with these ethnicities' spiritual life. For example, by priests, and there is absolutely no hint about Yasuke having anything to do with the spiritual aspects of any African culture. Heck, I don't even think Ubisoft bothered spending even a second on navigating the complex web of expansive pantheons with dozens of deities as well as various forms of spirit and nature worship which make up most West African religions. Those were some context of dreadlocks being worn in a spiritual manner. There are also cultures in which dreadlocks are a privilege afforded only to the female members of a culture. For example, among the Fulani or Himba, dreadlocks are virtually exclusively worn by women, and I feel fairly confident in Yasuke being a man. Even if Yasuke was a woman, among the Himba it is common to color dreadlocks with a mix of butter and red ochre, and Yasuke's hair is brown, and among the Fulani it is common to lavishly decorate dreadlocks with pearls and other ornamentation, and that is ignoring the fact that Fulani women can wear up to a dozen earrings per ear and Yasuke doesn't even wear a single one. Yasuke is clearly Sub-Saharan African, yet most Sub-Saharan hairstyles feature a different kind of braiding than dreadlocks, and as I just pointed out, Yasuke doesn't fit into any of the cultures which actually wear dreadlocks on the west coast of Africa. All of this makes me severely doubt that Ubisoft Quebec actually spent any time studying any African culture. They apparently just created a character who represents how they think African Americans look and then just inserted him into Sengoku-era Japan while dropping some pathetic hip-hop soundtrack in the background just in case they didn't seem sufficiently racist. My point here is that Ubisoft clearly just made Yasuke a main character because of some misguided political notions and not because they have such a deep respect for Africa or because he would add anything to the story, as evidenced by their non-existent care in creating his character's backstory or ethnic origins, which would obviously influence how he would behave in Japan. Nonetheless, this won't stop Ubisoft from giving Yasuke a prominent role in the story of Assassin's Creed Shadows. A role which might be even more disrespectful than him being a samurai. The main reason for this assumption is that I think that Oda Nobunaga is going to be the big bad of Assassin's Creed Shadows, and logically Yasuke would then be the great hero of the people who understands the meaning of honor far better than any Japanese person. I mainly draw this conclusion from the global reveal trailer, where Naoe stated that her village got destroyed in the name of unification.
All I have ever known in my life, our land, our customs, my family, burns in the name of unification.
Oda Nobunaga is literally known as the first unifier of Japan, so this set off my alarm bells. Then, after I took a closer look at the trailer, I realized that the soldiers attacking Naoe's village were wearing the mon, the Japanese equivalent of our European heraldry, of the Oda clan. It is now clear that the soldiers who raided Naoe's village, Yasuke among them, were in service to Oda Nobunaga. It would seem very likely that he personally ordered the annihilation of Naoe's shinobi clan. In the lore of Assassin's Creed, which admittedly is in a pathetic state ever since the release of Origins, well, if we're really honest, the lore has always been in a pathetic state, it is the assassins who kill Oda Nobunaga in 1582 after he has been corrupted by a Sword of Eden. This would be 3 years after the game, and in the lore the Japanese Brotherhood was still allied with Oda Nobunaga in 1579, but it just doesn't make any sense that Naoe would willingly work with the man who killed her entire family. It is therefore far more likely that AC Shadows just moves up the timeline for Oda Nobunaga's corruption by 3 years and turns him into the big bad for the game. Now, if Naoe wants vengeance for her family, the only way Yasuke can work with her is if he betrays Oda Nobunaga and acts as some kind of double agent. If my assumption is true, this means that the story of AC Shadows is even more disrespectful to the Japanese people than we already thought. You cannot stress enough the status and admiration Oda Nobunaga enjoys in Japan to this day. In Japanese pop culture, from manga to anime to video games, he is virtually always depicted as a charismatic and decisive leader, as a great visionary and military genius. To this day he is fondly remembered for his radical yet wise reforms, and still is a figure that stands for progress and innovation, in a positive sense. Certain Shinto shrines go even further than that and venerate Oda Nobunaga as a kami deity. Some people in Japan literally deify him, and Ubisoft is going to roll in and make him the big bad of AC Shadows. And as if this wasn't enough of a spit in the Japanese community's face, Oda Nobunaga, the first unifier of the nation, in a way also a spiritual father to the two subsequent unifiers, a man to this day seen as a visionary leader, praised for his many achievements, reduced to being some kind of petty war criminal. Ubisoft is going to top all of this off with Yasuke, some nondescript African American, being the one who brings him to justice. Just imagine the messaging. The evil, morally corrupt Japanese national hero who is defeated by the pure and righteous African American. You know it is 2024 when in a historical game that isn't even historical, a person from Africa who isn't even African fights some wildly disrespectful caricature of one of the greatest figures in Japanese history. Alright, that would be all from me. Do you think Ubisoft is actually foolish enough to go through with a story like this? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Cheers!